welcome everyone to The World is Open for Your Business. And we're excited about today's programming. Very excited to finally be able to work with the Chafee Center and so many of our partners and explore more opportunities around, making your business international. So Amy, what do we have on tap for today?
We have a panel starting at 12:05 on export support organizations that make it possible. So that's the SBA, the SBDC, Rhode Island Commerce. You'll hear from all of these people today. After that panel, we are going to have another very short networking session as we queue up to hear from businesses who have successfully gone global and are exporting in Rhode Island. And then we end the day, I should say, with 30 minutes of networking at the end of the session, all geared towards making sure we make those important connections and build the ecosystem together. So with that, I am going to welcome Linda to the stage and ask Toonie to turn off her camera and mic. Linda, if you could turn your camera and mic on, you will be able to join me.
Very good. Thanks so much, Amy, and thank you to Toonie for encouraging us to come and speak to this group today. We're really excited to work with Venture Capital, and you've been great at helping us get this all set up, and fingers crossed that our technology goes well. And I'm going to, go through some reasons about why you should think about exporting, as well as questions you need to be asking yourself, and then where you can go to get help with those questions. So next slide, Amy. So this is sort of these are standard statistics we kind of use. You'll have to hit the click, Amy, to why export. These are statistics that, the SBA puts together, the trade.gov puts together, just sort of to say why, if you're not exporting, you should be thinking about exporting. And basically, there's a whole world out there of potential buyers that's much larger than your base here in the United States. In fact, 95% of the world's consumers are not here in the USA. They're in other countries and other markets. And actually, growth is going to come from those other markets. It's not going to come within the United States. For the United States, GDP growth is typically going to come from international trade. Believe it or not, when you're selling overseas, you're typically a more profitable company. It's going to give you opportunities to expand your business and also make profits. And then as one other potential benefit from thinking about exporting, it gives you the opportunity to diversify your base of customers. So if there's a problem in the United States, then perhaps you've got a market in another country that can pick up the slack when maybe things are not going as well in the United States. Maybe the economy here is slowing down, but it's picking up someplace else. Maybe you've got a product that's not going to sell here in the wintertime because you sell swimming pools, but you can go to another country that's in a different hemisphere and sell to them in your down season. So these are some of the reasons in the big picture about why you should be thinking about exporting. And believe it or not, even though we all know the struggles that we're going through with the pandemic, we know that people aren't traveling, we know that we're not having one-on-one interactions with people, but exports are still strong. We have a couple of companies today that are going to talk about what they're doing and how they're surviving with their international business. But I can also tell you, I've talked with companies that their export sales are actually booming right now. And I just give you a quick example. There's a company here in Rhode Island that makes raincoats for a very niche market. They're for bicyclists. So you can imagine what a raincoat, a cape has to look like if you're riding a bicycle. And their international sales are up by over 400% because people in Europe in particular are not using mass transport. They're not driving. They're not taking the subway or the buses or the trains. They're getting out those bikes and riding their bikes to work or to visit or to go out to eat. And they're using these capes. So there are opportunities to take advantage of the situation and increase your business overseas. Next slide, Amy. Another reason that people are going to also think about exporting, and this is more on a personal level is that maybe you're getting inquiries coming in through your website. Maybe you're getting e-commerce opportunities. Maybe you're getting unsolicited requests because people have seen you on your website, have seen you on some other digital platform. Maybe you have personal relationships with people overseas, or maybe you're selling to a company in the US that has contacts overseas. But there's a lot of ways to get involved in exporting. What we typically recommend to people is that you have a strategic approach, that you have a plan, because otherwise, if it's just hit or miss, it's never going to become strategic. It's never going to become something that you can build on and you can continue to grow and that you can plan on. So one of the things that we're here to help you with is, how do you figure out strategically what your export plan should be? Next slide. So as an encouraging point, according to the Small Business Administration, small businesses have generated the majority of net new jobs, and these firms are selling internationally, and that's one of the ways that they're able to grow. And in fact, 98% of US exporters are small businesses. Next slide. So I just want to talk a little bit as a, sort of an introduction about what does it mean to export. I think everybody, when they think of exports, they think of a physical product. They think of, parts for automobiles. Maybe you make screws that go into machines. Maybe you make finished products, automobiles, and you're sending them overseas. But you can also export services. You can export technology. You can export ideas. So one of the things to think about when we talk about exporting is, what exactly is it that you can potentially export? Next slide, please. So this is just sort of a visual, and Amy will have to click through this, of the typical things we think about: sending products by air, by ocean, by train. But there are also other ways that exports can be accomplished. And some of these may surprise you, but sending something through the mail, obviously we've got the courier services, we've got UPS, keep going, Amy. But you can also actually technically be exporting something by having a phone conversation. If you're sharing information, technology, advice, guidance, knowledge, you can be sharing things. One more slide, I think, Amy, by sharing drawings, as this particular gentleman is doing there, which could be ideas that are governed by US regulations that you can't share. One more, I think, and there you go. Literally just having a conversation and sharing information can be considered an export. Next slide, please. So what I'm trying to say is, think broadly in terms of what you can export, and then what the rules and regulations are going to be that apply to your particular scenario. So again, when we talk about services, it could be any of these: financial, legal, HR, engineering services is a big one, consulting. So again, those are what we consider the service industries, and these are also exports. One more slide on this, because I find this interesting, that we may not think of education or as tourism as an export, but what I tell people is follow the money. And so when you think of tourism and you've got foreign visitors coming to the US and spending money here, that's an export, because a foreign party is paying for that. So the money's coming in from overseas. And similarly, exporting can be an education. When we bring foreign students to the United States and they're bringing in foreign money to receive that product. So that's an export. We're selling them the education that then we're getting their foreign currency to pay for. And then the other type of export, which I was mentioning, is this concept of a deemed export, something that you are sharing that's controlled, meaning controlled by the US government, with a foreign person. And you can be sharing it here in the United States or overseas, is what we call a deemed export. Because even though it may not even have left the United States, you could have shared it with someone who's a non-US citizen, and if it's controlled by the US government, that's not allowable. So again, just kind of broadening your understanding of what exporting really means. Amy, next slide. So who is the exporter? I run into this quite a bit when talking with people, and they want to talk about, they say, well, I'm the exporter. Well, if the exporter is actually the person who's selling that product overseas. So if you make a sale to a foreign buyer and you ship it out of the United States and you receive payment from that foreign buyer, then it's considered an export and you're the exporter. But if you're selling someone something here in the US that they're then putting into a product and then selling it overseas, you're not actually the exporter. Any of you who know Mark Haywood with the SBA, Mark has a very coined phrase called gazintus. You make things that gazinku something else. And in some instances, like with some of the SBA programs, they will look at that as export, and Ann will talk about this a little bit later on, but technically speaking, for you to be the exporter, you have to be the one selling it overseas and receiving that foreign payment. Next slide. So how do you become an exporter? In the United States, and I get this question a lot, people, particularly people from other countries, how do you be an exporter in the United States? Anybody can be an exporter. The only thing is that you have to abide by US government regulations as far as whether you do need a particular license or permission to sell particular products. But just to be an exporter, you don't just get a license that says, okay, you can be an exporter. Anyone can be an exporter, but you have to comply with US government regulations that may require you to get a specific type of license or permission from that particular government to be able to actually export your product. Next slide. So what we're going to talk about now is, how do you know if you're ready? How do you know if exporting is for you? And this is called an export readiness assessment. And it's going to help you. There's no right or wrong answers to this. This isn't a test. It's a pass-fail. It's to get you as a company thinking about exporting and what it's going to take, and is this something you really want to invest in and become engaged in, and as a long-term effort, not just like a hit or miss. So if you're ready, you're going to have to set realistic export expectations for yourself and your company, have the resources, and be able to actually execute a strategy. So next slide, Amy. So again, these are questions that you're going to ask yourself. I'm going to go through them quickly. I think Amy can share this PowerPoint if anyone's interested afterwards, but you're going to need to ask yourself, how well established is my current business? Or, you know, we talk with people and you say, you know, look, if extreme case, you're a Rhode Island company, Island, and now you're selling to Connecticut and Massachusetts first, unless you have something that's really outstanding that the market for it is overseas. We're not saying that exporting is necessarily the best step for you to take right now. So understand your current business and what your strategic plan is in the United States and what your domestic goals are. What are the goals for your business? Next slide. So after your current business, we want to talk about what are your international business goals. So thinking about international, how important would you rank that to your company's business plan? Is it something you say, if I could do it, it'd be nice, it's extra revenue? That's okay. Just be honest with yourself, because it's going to help you understand what it's going to take to do exporting and whether you're really ready to make that commitment. So where do you expect to be 5 years from now? And are you willing to create a marketing strategy? Next slide, please. So talking about your resources, one of the things to be able to export is you need to be able to put some resources into it. So who's going to be responsible for your exports? Do you have people? Do you have time? Do you have money to be able to put towards an export marketing strategy? Do you have the expertise in-house on how to export or know how to get that expertise? Do you have training? Do you have the ability to provide training? And then, very importantly, do you have production capacity? So when we talk about resources, just put information here, cash flow is important. that you need to be able to invest in your product and maybe adapting your product to the foreign market, to putting some advanced money into marketing your product. So understanding cash flow is very important, and Ann Hunt from the SBA is going to talk about some of the SBA programs that can help exporters. Next slide. So the next step is your business objectives. What is your tolerance for risk? Yes, selling internationally can be riskier than selling in the United States because you're not selling to people that have the same mindset that you do on business. You may not share the same business culture and standards. Banking systems are different. Government regulations are different. There can be economic upturns and downturns. There can be political upheavals. Are you ready to accept that risk and allow it time to become profitable for you? So that's something you need to ask yourself when you're evaluating where I'm going to go with my exports. Next slide, please. So then product or service, this is really important, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, but you need to make sure you're clear on what your product or service is that you want to sell and why you want to sell it overseas, and if you're willing to make changes to that product. And just a quick story that I like to tell, because at one point I was working with a small business out in the Midwest, and they were looking to sell overseas, and it was a marketing firm. So I asked them to tell me about what their product was or their service. And they said, well, we can do pretty much anything. You know, we can help you write a press release. We can help you run an event. We can design your website for you. We can do your marketing materials for you. I said, okay. I said, well, is there a particular industry or sector that you're, proficient in? Do you have any specific outstanding, competitive edge in languages or anything else? And they said, well, we've done some medical conferences and we've done a few other things. Well, it sort of sounds like going to apply for a job and saying, I can do anything you want. They needed to figure out what exactly it is they wanted to sell and who they wanted to sell it to. And through conversations, we identified that, in fact, they had a lot of experience in conducting events for people in the medical technology industry. So they decided to focus on their services of running events, symposiums, for medical research, which allowed them then to use all of their other skills, building out a website, doing press releases, preparing material. But now they had an exact description of their service that they wanted to provide and the target group they wanted to provide it to. So that's something as an exporter you want to think about. It can't be all things to all people. You have to identify what it is you want to be and who you want to present it to. Next slide. The last part of this is part of what I just said, target market, and understanding who it is you want to then target with this. Next slide, please. So we talk about management commitment. If you're a small business, you may be the manager and the owner and the chief financial officer all rolled into one, and you wear one hat. But if you are working for a larger company, you want to make sure that management is supporting this, that management is behind you in terms of providing the resources that you need and making it a priority for the company and willing to make the changes to allow this to happen. So getting management buy-in from the top is very important. And I apologize for these slides coming up a little off. Amy, next slide, please. So, are you ready to go international? Do you believe that you have all these things that we just talked about? Because if you do, we as a group are ready to help you. Next slide. And actually, you can skip right over that one because they can see us all right there. So if you believe you have a product that international buyers want, how do you get started? One of the things that we're going to talk about today is some of the programs we offer that can help you identify potential buyers for your products. How do you connect with them? Through whether it's some of our virtual trade missions and trade show events, whether it's through the U.S. Commercial Service programs that can help you find a buyer in a particular market, whether it's you exhibiting at international trade shows. We are here to help guide you through that path of identifying the market that you would have the best potential in, or if you know a market, finding those particular buyers or customers for you. Next slide. So the basic starting point for any of this is basic planning. For those of you that may not have an established business, you may be trying to figure out, what's my business entity? What should I be? How do I create a business plan? And the SBDC and Ed Hootnauer are going to talk about how they can help you get started with the basics, and also how you can go through this export readiness assessment to see if you're really ready to move into exporting. So that's one place to start. The next slide, please. If you already are an established business and you're ready to have your export plan and want to do all of these things, select the best markets, set goals, that's when you can then start taking advantage of some of the services that I mentioned between Keith and Kathy of myself to helping you figure out best markets to go into. Next slide. So what you need to have in this export marketing plan, as I mentioned, was this commitment statement from management, clearly defining what your product is, understanding your cost. You know, we're going to talk about the 4 Ps of marketing: your product, your price, how are you going to promote it, and how you're going to position it in the market, your market entry strategy. Then under your export plan, you want to dedicate the resources that you have to it and have an actual action plan with goals and with timelines. So these are the elements of an export plan. And again, that any of us can provide you with some guidance on. Next slide, please. So again, identifying overseas market opportunities, SBDC, the Chafee Center, Commerce RI, the U.S. Commercial Service, we can talk about those. I gotta hurry up and get through my slides here. So the next one, I'm gonna talk about one of the programs that we have at the Chafee Center. Next slide, Amy, which is for the STEP grant. So, oops, oh yeah, I added this slide. So other things you're gonna need to know as you get down the way, because what we've talked about primarily is, how do I get started? How do I find companies that wanna buy my product or that I can sell my services to? As you get through that, you need to figure out, again, we can help you with all of this, how to ship your product and get it delivered, how to comply with foreign regulations, and how to get paid, because the sale is never done until you have that money and the check is cleared the bank, as they say. Next slide. I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk about a grant program that we have here in Rhode Island called STEP. It stands for State Trade Expansion Program. This is a grant that's funded through the U.S. Small Business Administration, and it's available to any state to participate in. And now the Chafee Center at Bryant University is the STEP grant recipient in Rhode Island, and we have this funding to be able to assist small businesses with activities that are going to help them grow their international sales. Next slide, please. The goal of the STEP program is to really increase the number of small businesses that export. That means if we've got companies that have not ever exported before, we want to help them get started. And then if we have companies that are already exporting, we want to help them grow that business. We want to help them enter new markets. So that's the whole goal of the STEP grant. This funding is to be used specifically for small businesses and to support their efforts to increase their international sales. Next slide. Just keep going, Amy, because I want to hurry up and get through this so we can get to our panel. To be eligible, next slide, for the STEP grant, basically you need to meet the SBA definition of a small business. Usually it's based on number of employees. Used to be typically less than 500 employees, but it really goes by your next code. So you'd have to look at that to determine if you'd be eligible. You have to be a for-profit company, and to participate in the Rhode Island STEP grant, you'd have to be registered to do business in Rhode Island and operating in Rhode Island and been in business at least for 1 year. Newly added to the STEP grant is the requirement that your product has to be of U.S. origin or at least 51% U.S. content. And then the goal is to provide your products and services to be delivered abroad to customers overseas. Next slide, please. And then I think I'll wrap it up with this slide. This is the activities that can be covered with STEP funding. So for your participation in a state-sponsored trade show or trade mission, including some of the virtual missions that we offer, you can receive reimbursement through the STEP program. The U.S. Department of Commerce programs that Keith's going to talk about are eligible for STEP reimbursement. For you to participate independently as a company at an international trade event, whether it's virtual or maybe in the future in person, would be eligible for STEP support. International training programs, and then what we call the procurement of consultancy services, which means you hiring someone to help you develop international marketing materials, internationalize your website, search engine optimization, translation, e-commerce, a wide range of programs. And anyone that's interested can reach out to me. I can send you the program guidelines with all of that information. And the other slides, Amy, are really just a list of the different agencies. I did add, just want to mention that STEP is a reimbursement program. So you would have to be able to pay the money upfront, complete the project, and then be able to submit for reimbursement.